Welcome back to the Leverage Podcast, where our goal is simple: to learn from the best and discover how we can all live a better life, build a more fruitful business, and be more productive. Join us each week as we interview fellow entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and leading experts to discuss everything from marketing secrets to new technology and life as an entrepreneur.
Hello and welcome back to the Leverage Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nick Sonnenberg, and today I am honored to be introducing a very special guest. His name is Jeff Wald. He is a personal friend and expert in the field of future of work, which is something, as you know, I am deeply passionate about. Jeff is the founder of a company called WorkMarket. It's a freelance management system that enables companies to efficiently and compliantly organize, manage, and pay their extended workforce. So basically, if you employ a lot of freelancers, you can use this tool to manage and pay all of them, and it makes everything just super easy. They were acquired by ADP, which is, as you probably heard, one of the largest HR and payroll companies. As you can imagine, I was super excited to talk with Jeff because he's one of the few people I can really geek out on future of work. We share a lot of the same beliefs on the future of work, where things are going, how AI and automation is going to play a key role in that. But Jeff is different from most people in that he is actually making his predictions based on data. And he just recently wrote a great book, which I highly recommend, called The End of Jobs: The Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. And he basically goes back and looks at tons of labor data trends over the years, and then he uses that to extrapolate what he thinks is going to happen in the future. He actually launched a prize for $10 million. Whoever makes the most accurate prediction is going to win $10 million. So while most people are just making their guesses based on what they think, Jeff's making predictions based on data and trends. And I think this stuff is really valuable for entrepreneurs and small business owners, especially those in the startup space. These changes are going to affect how we all work, how we run our companies. So it's important to get prepared now so you can thrive when things do change in the future. And it's already happening. We can see it. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking because you're going to be much better off hearing about all this stuff from Jeff himself. So let's get into the episode and hear what Jeff has to say about the future of work. Welcome back to the Leverage Podcast. On today's episode, we have my good friend, Jeff Wald. There's not many people in the world as focused on future of work, gig economy, on-demand freelancer, workforce. Jeff built a very, very, very large company that was acquired by ADP called WorkMarket, which I'd love for you to talk about. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Super excited to be here and always great to talk with you.
Yeah, so we haven't caught up in a while and I wanted to catch up with you. And I figured, hell, it's probably going to be a really interesting conversation. We might as well record it so other people can hear all the smart stuff that you have to say. So what's going on with you? I know you sold to ADP. Could you explain a little bit what WorkMarket is? And I'm curious to catch up with you and just know what are you up to next and what are your thoughts right now?
So WorkMarket is an enterprise software platform that enables corporations to organize, manage, and pay their freelancers. Started the company 10 years ago. We raised about 70 million in venture from Union Square Ventures, Spark Capital, SoftBank, and a few others. And we were chugging along, ups and downs. You know, we'd like to pretend that it was all an upward journey and we had no issues, but there were thousands of mistakes that I made and that led to thousands of issues for the company. But we persevered with a great team, great partners, great customers, great investors. And in 2018, we sold the company to ADP, which has been just amazing. I mean, they're an amazing company. I didn't appreciate how much of a technology firm that they are. And it's been an amazing home. I will tell you, when we first announced it that morning, a bunch of people came up to me, a bunch of our engineers. They're like, I don't want to work for ADP. I was like, I get it. I get your impression. You're dead wrong. Just give them a few weeks and you will see. And every few weeks, they're like, dude, I'm psyched to be here. And we mostly have kept the team through 2+ years, which has been fantastic, and added a bunch of new people. But ADP had this vision of, look, we are the largest HCM company on the planet. They make human capital management software. They obviously are more known as a payroll company, but they're actually the largest HCM software company in the world. And our software is entirely focused on the W-2 world. And there is an increasing corporate need to manage on-demand labor. And we can either build it or we're going to buy it because the world is going that way. And so instead of building something, they bought us and they have bolted us on to their massive offer. I mean, we're the tiny piece on this, $100 billion market cap company. We are slowly helping to enable companies' vision of the future of work, where all labor resources, full-time, part-time, temp, freelancer, are all managed in one system. And it's been a great ride.
Well, that's one thing that we've obviously hit it off on. Me running Leverage, which is a freelancer market, like a managed freelancer marketplace. There's a lot of similarities in terms of how I feel, how we both view future of work. What kind of business or size company would be a customer of WorkMarket? Is it for larger enterprises? And I'm curious to know what's updated with the product, but is it still both managing your internal freelancers that you hired, but then also you have access to a pool of talent as well?
It is both, but it is first and foremost an enterprise software tool for managing your own freelancers. And so while we have some of the Fortune 50 as customers, a lot of the Fortune 500 as customers, it is not the size of the company that determines the need for an FMS, a freelance management system, a category of software we created. It is more the number and complexity of their freelance engagements. Because here's the thing, Nick, 90% of companies in the world use freelancers, but how many of them use enough freelancers and enough of a volume where they need a piece of software to drive efficiency and drive compliance? And so we tend to see about $1 million and spend about 100 freelancers as those thresholds where you start to say, I really can't manage this in a spreadsheet. Because look, if you've got 15 freelancers, you're not going to bring WorkMarket in. That's bringing a bazooka to a child's patty cake game. Yeah. When you run into issues around efficiency, when you start to run into issues around compliance, that is when our software is the only software in the world to solve that problem.
It's funny that we're talking now because it's become more and more of an issue and a topic internally at Leverage. We've been doing it primarily on Airtable. Mm-hmm. If the company is using timers like Harvest to track time or Toggle to track the freelancer's time, do you integrate with all the timer tools to handle the calculation of what you owe them?
So short answer is we integrate with hundreds of different pieces of software. There were 3 kind of cores in our development philosophy and the way we built the system. First was security, because obviously we're moving billions of dollars around just on the WorkMarket platform. The second was mobile, because all of the freelancers are interacting with us through their mobile app. Nobody's going home at the end of the day, logging into their laptop. And third was API, because we are enterprise software, we need to be plugged in. Now, whether that plug is into Salesforce or an accounting package or some other ERP system, or whether the API is into a series of ticketing systems or sub portions of ticketing systems, timing, tracking, and things like that, almost every single endpoint at WorkMarket can be pushed and pulled. And so that has been at the core of what we had to do from the beginning.
And it works internationally. It's not just U.S. employees. And you handle the payroll side of this as well. So I have people in France, you can pay them. We have people in Canada, U.S., Ukraine. You cover all that. That's super useful. We've known each other for a while. I should have been using your service for a while. What are some of the key things that have changed on the product side in the last year?
Well, I'll tell you this, as good as we were from a security standpoint, and we were darn good. We got our SOC 2, which isn't a huge deal, but it's a huge deal for a startup. That is a very cumbersome process. And, we thought we were pretty good. We called ourselves best in class. And then ADP's team came in and they were comfortable buying us because we were that good, but compared to them, we were a joke. And so, ADP moves trillions of dollars around the globe. Wow. And so they are one of the most attacked companies on the planet. And therefore, they are by far one of the best companies from a cybersecurity standpoint. And the teams that they have, ex-NSA, ex-CIA, FBI, huge NOCs, where it's mind-blowing. I've been inside them. They're super cool. They're very James Bond movie-esque. But so we had a serious time upgrading our stuff. Then that is not the last year. That was since the acquisition. Over the last year, we have been very focused on a host of different things that we call our org structures. So most large enterprises use freelancers, but they don't use enough maybe within one division. But the CFO needs to know about everybody and all their freelancers. But the way every different division engages is kind of like a different company. And our solution to that used to be very large media company has a bunch of different brands. This is a client of WorkMarket's, whose name I'm not allowed to say, but they would just have different accounts on WorkMarket, and we'd roll it all up for them in a report and send the report for the executive teams. Mm-hmm. That wasn't scalable. And so we've been creating a situation where you can have multiple orgs within one account that each has their own workflow, that each has their own approval flows, each has their own permissionings, and all of that rolls into the main account, which is going to finance and HR and to the executives. And that becomes super important as you start going up the stack and working with larger and larger companies.
Let's go to your book for a second. I actually bought it. It's on my list right now to read. Just the title alone is something that, for me, catches my eye because I'm super into how do you run the most efficient company, future of work, on-demand labor. One thing that I tell people all the time is really what I geek out on is how do you run the most efficient company, have systems, processes to run not just the most efficient company, but to run a remote efficient company, which to me is the future of work. So what sparked the idea for the book? Maybe don't give it all away, but maybe you could just give a 30,000 foot view on what the book is about.
Well, I'll start with your first question, which is how is it going? And it's actually been amazing. We did hit number one in all of Amazon's HR categories. Friends of mine that have read the book that are hypercritical that, I'm friends with because they're super smart, they're super accomplished, called up and they said, I actually learned something. I was like, oh my God, thank you. Because, you know this, you put a book out there and it allows everyone to sit there and criticize. And I am all open to criticism. And I'd love any feedback, especially yours on the book. But the reason I wrote it, so I get very frustrated as a very analytical and very data-driven person. I get very frustrated by predictions that people make, really even statements, quite frankly, that people make that are not backed by evidence. And in the future of work, there are three very important evidence bases that one really needs to take into account. The first is just the history of work. If you are not looking at how things have been done in the past and you're making assumptions in the future that have nothing to do with the past, I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying you don't have a high probability of being correct. That's point one. Point two are data trends. And so what data has persisted? And if you were going to predict a data line that went like this, you suddenly think it's going to go like that. Okay, again, I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I'm just going to say, but for the last 100 years, the data has moved in this very slow way. Why would it all of a sudden move? And so looking at those data patterns in the world of work is super important. And then third is how companies actually engage workers. Because there's this general notion on a lot of people that make predictions about the future of work that companies just want to go to the lowest cost resource no matter what. And cost is certainly a factor in that equation. But anybody thinks that a C-level group of executives, men and women sitting there are saying, just get me the cheapest labor resource anywhere you can. They've never been in a boardroom. They've never been in an executive committee meeting. That is definitively not what executives do. There are a host of factors, and cost is one, and it's an important one. But the regulatory environment, the intellectual property involved, customer knowledge, customer touch points, complexity, ramp-up times, length of project, all of those things are factors, as is the regulatory environment. And so there was one prediction that always kind of stuck in my craw, if you will, which was in 2010 when I founded WorkMarket, everybody in the world of labor, everybody I met would say one thing. By 2020, 50% of the labor force is going to be on demand. And I'd always look and say, why? Why is that going to happen? I agree that it's growing. I agree that it's increasingly important, but I never understood why, because historically, that's never happened. And on-demand labor has been here for generations. It's not something new. The data trends would show that it's grown very slowly, very steadily. Some data trends actually would say that it's shrunk a little bit over the last 15 years. But for the most part, when you take all the sources of data and bring them together, the median would say slow and steady growth. And so that would yield 25 to maybe 30% over a 10-year period, not 25 to 50. And then third, there is a natural limit about how companies engage labor. That means on-demand labor, I don't think ever could get to 50%, but that's a whole separate topic. And so all those things led to me to say, why are you saying this? And so I started to write a book focused on on-demand labor. And the book started to evolve into all of labor, because as we stand in the beginning innings of what some are calling the fourth industrial revolution. In the book, I call it the first services revolution. It's important to understand how workers, companies, and society are going to react to robots and AI. It's important to understand it from a historic standpoint, what happened in the first three industrial revolutions. It's important to understand it from a data trend standpoint. Where are robots today? How many robots have been engaged? What are the data trends in terms of adoption? And it's important to understand it in terms of how companies engage workers, including robots and AI. How quickly do companies say, oh, well, a robot can do that and just make a change? Not that quickly. And so those things all became very important. And this framework of an evidence-based model became very important and became the crux of the book.
And I was just reading on Amazon, you have a Future of Work prize that you're offering with the book. So can you explain that a little bit?
So this was actually our good friend Cheryl Strauss-Einhorn's.
Is it? That's her idea?
It is her idea. I mean, the kernel of it is her idea. I do give her credit. And I just spoke with her the other day. What a wonderful human. And she and I, in the beginning of this, she said, well, you should get contributors. And I thought, yeah, I should get contributors because I don't like writing and I'm not that great a writer. And so getting other people to write for me, that seems like a great idea.
So that's a good example of outsourcing.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Why chapter 10 is my favorite chapter in the book, mostly because I didn't write it. So I started asking people, hey, would you write an essay on what you think the world of work looks like in 2040? And the people I was asking were the people that ran the largest labor unions in the country, ran the largest staffing firms, were the CHROs at major corporations, were people that were academically or from a law standpoint or from a government standpoint helping to shape the future of work. And as they started to say yes, I thought, wow, I can't believe all these people are saying yes. Like, this is crazy. I didn't think they would say yes. And I thought I need to make this more interesting. And I had just had a chance to listen to the founder of the X Prize speak at an ADP conference and was just blown away. And I've always been a huge fan of the X Prize. And I thought,
so who spoke? Peter Diamandis?
Yeah. He's, my gosh, just amazing. And I thought, all right, I'll pattern this on that. And because it's in 2040, I, can be comfortable taking the money and putting into account that it'll grow to 10 million in 2040. And, if someone asked me to give 10 million now, I'm not sure I'd be so quick to do it, but I don't actually root for inflation, but in the Future of Work Prize context, inflation. So we'll see. We'll see. It has been amazing to see what they wrote. They're all ridiculously talented. They are all literally shaping the future of work. And again, chapter 10 is by far my favorite chapter.
So is the prize just open to the people that already submitted the essay, or is the submission still open right now? Like, could I get in on the 10 million right now, or am I too late?
The legal documents do define it as the 20 people in the book.
Ah, okay.
Gotcha. But next time. I'm not saying I won't do another
whenever you're going to cut a 10 million check potentially. So one of these 20 people are going to make $10 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah. One of the writers in the book will get this prize.
So the expected payout's $500K a person. Were there any patterns in what they were predicting? Did you have a common theme, but some were just totally different than others?
There was certainly a pattern in my conversations with them. I don't know that I'd say that there's a pattern in their writing because they all took very different approaches. Some wrote as short stories. Some wrote as letters to their kids or grandkids. Some wrote just on the education system. Some wrote just about retirees. Some wrote just about independent workers. But I will tell you this, there was a general theme, and not just my conversations with them, but my interviews with a few hundred other people that I interviewed over the course of writing this book over 6 years. And that was the time in which skills will diminish is going to massively compress. And it is going to force everybody to become a lifelong learner, to be able to refresh their skills. And it's going to force companies to re-engage in a training model that they've mostly abandoned. They mostly have said people got to do their own training. Companies are going to have to come back and do more of it. And people are going to have to do more of it because everybody's got to spend the time. It used to be, from 18 to 22, you would do the majority of the learning that you would then monetize over a 30-year period.
Now you have to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, that 18 to 22 skill set is going to diminish over 3 or 4 years. And if you're not constantly refreshing, you are not going to be able to monetize the skill set.
One of the key things that people say after coming and working at Leverage for a bit is that they say that they've never learned as much. We're so geeky about how do you run the most efficient company? Like the way that we operate is something that I obsess over. So we're throwing a lot of new tools out there to make everyone more and more efficient. And a lot of people are just super thankful and surprised at how much they actually learned in terms of how to be more productive, more efficient while being remote.
That is a great legacy. I was asked the other day, what is your most proud accomplishment? And I started rattling off names like Caitlin McCormick, Caitlin Mann, Ryan Ballard, Mike Schwartz. The guy's like, what are you saying? I'm like, these are the men and women that have massively step functioned their career because they were at WorkMarket, because they learned what it was to work hard and to come with a great attitude, because they're all smart and they all, knew how to work, but they didn't know how to work the way I make people work. And a few people have come back and they said, look, I couldn't stand you when I was here. I didn't understand why you were so demanding. And so my focus was not on tools and this and that. It was just, I don't really care what your excuse is, get the job done. And they would leave and they would go to their new company. After a few years, they would leave and would come back and they would say, I've been promoted twice because nobody knows how to get shit done. And I couldn't stand you when I was here. And now I get it. And literally this sentence has been said to me, beyond my parents, you're the most important person that has influenced my life. And I was like, win. That is the greatest thing anyone will ever say to me. And so that's been my greatest achievement are those men and women that are they were amazing before and they've become all the more amazing.
Well, you've impacted millions of people through, you gave a lot of freelancers access to opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to.
That is true. That is true.
So I'm passionate, obviously, about this space. I have a book that I've put on pause for about the last year because I didn't feel actually to be vulnerable. It's all about how do you run the most efficient company. The book title is called Come Up for Air, How Your Team Can Leverage Systems and Tools to Stop Drowning in Work. And then I took a step back and I realized actually we're drowning in work. Why would I publish a book where we're actually, we're getting better, but I've been really stuck on one part of the book and we're extremely good on the efficiency side, but still we're not as good as I know we could be. And we never will be. It's a moving target. But I've been stuck because I've been trying to crack this one thing that I think that we've just recently cracked. So I should finish the book in the next month or two. So I'd love for you to be a beta reader. I think that you actually really like it.
I'd love to read it.
What I learned, and I'm curious in your experience with running your business and what you've seen with Future of Work and how to run remote companies, I found kind of 3 buckets that every company needs to operate efficiently, especially if they want to be remote, which I would imagine was a common theme amongst the 20 people was remote work. So in order to run remotely, you have to be able to use some core pieces of technology. It doesn't matter which ones, but you have to have some baseline technology because you can't just operate. Zoom and text is great, but it's not going to get you past the finish line. So I kind of broke it down into 3 buckets. I call it CPR, communicate, plan, resource. Mm-hmm. So every team, you need to communicate with your team, not just your team, but your clients. So communication externally and internally. What are the tools to do that? How do you do it in the most efficient way? So not just telling you about Slack or Teams, but there's a million ways to use these tools. How do you actually use it right? Channel naming conventions, integrations, private versus public channels. When should you use Slack versus text versus email? What's the difference between a communication tool versus a project management tool? A lot of people are project managing off of text and email when it should live in Asana or Trello or whatever. So teaching people when you should use one type of tool versus another. And then again, million ways to use Asana or one of these tools. How do you actually use it right? And then lastly, what I call resources, documenting knowledge. And most companies that I found don't do any knowledge documentation. And I kind of split that into 2 buckets, static and dynamic. So static would be SOPs that answer the question, who, what, when, where, why, who's the CEO, where's the office, what are the core values? And then you have dynamic knowledge that answers the question, how do you do payroll? How do you onboard a new team member? Or it's a sequence of steps. And I kind of found those were the 3 kind of core buckets that we run leverage off of, but seemed like it was a common theme with all the clients that we had as well, that we started. One of the big pivots that we've made at Leverage is we really have doubled down on the operational efficiency. So we got out of the virtual assistant space, we moved more into marketing, and now we're really doubling down on helping teams and organizations get set up with these tools to become more and more remote and become remote efficient. And what I found is a company can only grow if it can transfer knowledge quickly. It's really a direct function that a company can only scale as fast as knowledge can be transferred. And all the slippage inside of companies where information gets lost or, hey, did Jeff text me that? Or is that in a group message, et cetera? It slows people down. And you probably know this stat. I was researching on the Department of Labor statistics, and the rate of turnover internally at companies is growing exponentially. So like if you take what was the average tenure of someone at a company 20 years ago versus 10 years ago versus now, the rate of turnover is going up exponentially right now, at least according to some of the stats that I looked at. And I'm sure for every stat that you look at, you probably find a counter argument. So what that means though is, if you take that to the extreme level and people are turning over, say the average now, I forget the number, say it used to be 10 years, then it went to 3, say it's a year and a half now. If in 10 years that goes down to 6 months, 3 months, by the time someone gets ramped up in your business, if they just leave a month later, you're not really going to be getting much value out of them. So it's going to become, in my view, more and more important that you have these systems and processes well dialed in and well documented so that if the average does go down to 6 months, if you are able to capture all the knowledge of that person, get them up to speed instead of 3 months, 3 days, at least you still can be getting a return on investment even as that retention number goes down on average.
So, it's interesting when I've been having conversations about the book, the number one question is, well, how does COVID change everything? And I have two broad responses to that. The first is we don't know yet. I mean, that's the point of the book, is we need to use data. We don't have any data yet. This is unprecedented, to use a phrase that's been used a lot. And the second is it seems to be speeding up existing trends. And one of those existing trends is remote work. And when people ask me about remote work, I always start with data. And that data is that pre-COVID, people working remotely, meaning they were fully working remotely, not some of the time, but more than 50% of the time, they were not in an office. And that was 3% of the labor force. And it had grown about 100% over the 10 years before. And I didn't think it was going to grow much. I thought it would grow maybe from 3% to 4% over the next 10 years. And it is now going to grow much, much more. It's probably going to get to 8% of the labor force, keeping in mind that 42% is the natural limit. Meaning if everyone that could work remote was working remote, that'd be 42% of the US labor force, because clearly people that work in retail and transportation and manufacturing and a host of other jobs can't work remotely. So let's leave that aside for a second. And I'll often say the impediment to more remote work were two important things. One was just the mindset of some old school managers that would say, yeah, I know all the data says that remote workers are happier, they're more engaged, they have higher retention, they're more productive, they cost less, but I just think everyone should be in the office. And you can't argue with that. I'm like, so your data is you think? Yeah, because I've literally had this conversation with multiple senior executives. And the second thing was that companies lacked the infrastructure and the policies and the procedures to effectively work remotely. And everything you just said, Nick, is so ridiculously spot on. People just think, oh, we got Zoom, we're good. No, you're not. What does it mean? How does a process work? How is data flowing? How are decisions made? How are you going to affect this whole remote work? Because if you don't do it thoughtfully, you're not going to see productivity increases, because the remote work we saw before was very piecemeal. It was somebody needed a flexible work arrangement, so we allowed them to work remote, but everyone else needs to be in the office. So they would plug into existing policies and procedures, and they had to adapt. If you're doing it at scale, the policies and the procedures have to adapt. And companies didn't seem to understand it, and they kind of had to do it, but they're not doing it great. The infrastructure stuff, they did great. I think there's a huge, round of applause that's got to go to the IT departments all around the world, quite frankly, that created remote VPNs and secure IP tunneling and a host of things. They didn't do as securely as they wanted to, which is why Zoom bombing is the least of our issues from a cybersecurity standpoint that'll come out. That's been occurring over the last few months. But it is the policies and procedures that companies have been so lacking on, and they didn't put them in place. They still need to.
And the problem's always existed. They're just more exposed when you're remote. It's not that when you were in person, you were operating, you could just brute force it a little bit better because you just go and I tap on your shoulder. But the issue has always been there. And I just find that if you do have the right systems, processes in place, it really can improve the culture and it can really allow you to scale. I mean, to think that you're only going to ever hire people in a 30-mile radius of your office, you're really not giving yourself all the opportunity. You think that the best person for that particular type of job, you're going to find miraculously in 30 miles. No, I mean, it could be in another country, another state, another city. So I just think that the future is remote. If you do have the tech set up, it unlocks so much potential. I find that the trickiest part and where we spend a lot of time is how do you maintain culture in a remote environment? Because I can maintain the productivity in a remote environment, but you still aren't getting that in-person, hey, let's grab a coffee, talk face-to-face. So how do you replicate that? And I find that to be the trickiest part where we're really hyper-focused right now. Beyond that, everything else is, to me, a net positive.
What do you think about the onboarding of a new team member in that space? It's one thing to take existing relationships and move them remote. It's another to try to start one.
Well, we've always been remote, so I've only ever onboarded people remote. However, we are constantly trying to reimagine what's a better onboarding experience for someone, right? So we're going to start shipping new team members a box with some books and a note and some other things, right? So little things like that to maintain the culture. Just on Wednesday, we did a team exercise. We're remote. Have you ever done one of those escape the rooms? Where you get locked in a room?
No.
You get locked in a room for an hour and you have to escape?
I was just afraid that I would start smashing things and get frustrated.
I think they're really fun. We should do one in New York sometime. But we did a virtual one as a team. There was 10 of us and we did a Zoom. I could send you the URL if you want. It's a really fun team exercise. Couple $100. You have a puzzle facilitator person and you are on a Zoom together and you have to solve puzzles basically. It was not as good as in person, but it was pretty cool.
We had these things called social squads where we break the entire company down into about 8 different teams. And we always would do in-person events, bowling or ping pong tournaments or things like that. And so now we've been doing Family Feud and trivia because these social squads are cross-function, people from sales and from marketing and from finance and from engineering and from product. And they're cross-office since we have 4 offices around the world. And so it allows people to bond around their social squad. And then the social squad goes and, plays something. And so maybe we'll do some escape the rooms together.
There's someone on our team, Andrew. Andrew Parks. He is our head of growth now. He had a full-time job in Toronto at a company making 6 figures, but he had to commute an hour a day. So 2 hours a day, he was in the car, stuck in traffic, away from family and kids. And he's in Toronto, which gets pretty cold in the winter. We're not the highest paying people in the world, but we gave comparable rate, but he has unlimited vacation policy, within reason, just don't be an asshole kind of policy. I don't care where he works. So he works from home. He has a walking treadmill. He walks 7 miles a day, saves 2 hours a day of commute. He spent all of February in Mexico this last year. And so money-wise, he's the same. Quality of life-wise, though, he is a million times in a different bucket. So I just think that there's so much exciting stuff that we're just on the cusp of with future of work that I think if it's done right, people's lives can really be amplified.
Well, if it's done right is the big question, because companies having the right infrastructure, having the right policies and procedures are going to be key. And I think there are a bunch of great companies that are going to get built out of this space and continue to grow as yours.
Hope so, knock on wood. So it's funny what you said a little bit ago about COVID and the trend. So in the Facebook group, Michael McDonald just wrote, after 2009, it seemed the world was trending to more efficient, lower cost production and many people seeking online gigs. Do you see COVID changing trends as countries lose confidence in single supplier sources?
Ooh, that is a great question. Great question. So one of the 5 trends that I talk about now is deglobalization, the decoupling of the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy, the insourcing or reshoring of a lot of work product. And so I think that trend existed pre-COVID. COVID is accelerating it because now you have national health concerns around drug, precursors and a host of other things. We don't make that here. We don't make a vaccine. Like all of that stuff is going to get accelerated. In terms of on demand, I would challenge the notion that in 2009, there was such huge growth. Now, we had companies start to form, WorkMarket form, Uber, Lyft, and a bunch of other companies formed. And then from that, we saw the DoorDashes and the Postmates and Instacarts. And those companies are very important. They're very important to the on-demand economy, but it's important to remember they represent way less than 1% of the on-demand economy. They are tiny, tiny, tiny companies when compared to the U.S. economy as a whole. And so their emergence is important and they take up a lot of oxygen in the discussion. But from a data standpoint, they're kind of statistically insignificant. So there has been some data pointing to growth in the on-demand economy, and the ADP Research Institute has, I think, the best paper on this, because our data at ADP comes from the trillions of dollars in payroll, including 1099 payments that we are making as a company. And so we're atomizing that data, and we're looking at the data trends company to company and seeing what kind of market share 1099s are taking. From a data standpoint, you should look at those things. Because again, when you look at the data sources, MBO Partners has done a study every year. The Freelancers Union has done a study every year. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has done some studies. McKinsey has done some studies. When you look at all those studies, you will see a market that is slowly growing. Some say about the same size, and some would say shrinking over the last 10 years. So we should be very careful, and we should look at the data. The ADP data, again, actually doesn't do surveys, which is what all the others do. We look at actual payroll data, and we would show slight growth. We actually are probably one of the more bullish in terms of our data set on the growth in the on-demand economy. All that said, here's a conversation I've never had. In the thousands of sales calls I've been on for WorkMarket over the last 10 years, I have never walked into a C-suite and had somebody say, hey, we want to start moving our W-2 workers to 1099s. It's never happened. Never once. I'm not saying it's never happened in the US economy. I'm just saying if it did happen, I would have heard about it because I was the only game in town to help them manage at that kind of scale. I will tell you this. Here's a conversation I have heard a couple hundred times. Yeah, we're going to move our 1099s to W-2s. We are getting uncomfortable with the regulatory environment, and we are getting too concerned. So I appreciate it's more efficient to run an on-demand organization, to have an agile corporation, but the risk associated with it is too high.
To some degrees, it's more efficient. We're actually starting to move people from 1099 to W-2 as well, not the other way around, because it also just changes the relationship. When people are logging time, to the second, and that they get paid based on that, they're not thinking about how to improve their work or their process while they're showering. Like when they hit the stop, they're out. So it just builds a different type of relationship. So I think that there's a space for on-demand and the fractional, but it doesn't replace the need for full-time.
So many reasons I think you're the greatest. And you know what? Because you're 100% right about that. Like people
say, that's why we get along.
50%. It's not going to go to 50%. Like companies won't do it because all of those variables, you want to do it sometimes. Sometimes it makes sense. And as a practical matter, what people don't appreciate is the data. I'm not saying different anecdotes, but the data would tell us that a freelancer gets paid a higher hourly rate than a full-time worker. And so the benefits of using a freelancer is that you are 100% utilized, whereas the average in the service industry, the average employee in the service industry is 60% utilized. So I'm paying a little bit higher on an hourly rate, but I'm only paying them 60% of the time because that's when they actually are doing stuff. And so this is a balance. In some work streams, freelance makes sense. In some, it will never make sense.
100%. I think that a lot of companies do a really bad job, though, of how do you measure success of an employee or a worker? And they're very little do a really good job of being a results-driven organization. And I think that that's a big reason maybe why some people prefer the freelancers. But if you are more results-driven and people are very clear what's the definition of success, that slippage of underutilized full-time people, I think, goes down a lot.
You're correct. Look, there are a lot of efficiencies yet to be wrung from labor resource management. And that is why in ADP's vision of the future, you can see all of your labor resources, full-time, part-time, temp, freelancers, robots, drones, AI systems, whatever, in one system. And being able to see everything in one place allows you to begin the process of more efficient allocation. Right now you can't because you don't know what your different cost bases are and your different resources and who you have available.
Are you seeing yet bots have employee IDs inside of ADP?
I have not, but here's an underreported story. We think that WorkMarket was the first place to send a task to a robot, because one of our programmers in 2010, before we even released the product in one of the tests, sent an assignment to a remote control car. And I don't know how he did it, but we sent the assignment for the remote control car to go somewhere. It went somewhere and it came back and it was pretty sick. Like, I don't know what it did, but it was so fun to watch and we kind of freaked out, and we should have taken pictures and recorded it and posted it, but it might get lost in history that we were the first people to actually send a task to a robot.
All right. Well, that's awesome. So Jeff, I want to be respectful of your time. This was awesome. And we definitely should do this again because there's not that many people I can geek out on future of work like this. Where can people find out more about you? And also what's next for you?
Always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Always happy on Twitter at Jeffrey Wald. It's the only place I go by Jeffrey instead of Jeff. That and my nephews and nieces call me Uncle Jeffrey. I don't understand why.
And Facebook, you're Jeffrey apparently.
Fair point. I guess Jeff Wald got taken. I don't move quick enough, and when these platforms come out,
a bot picked it up.
In terms of what's next, what's next is to be determined. I am thinking about a bunch of different things. Right now, I'm going to be with ADP for the near term, but at some point, my time there will end. I will stay engaged with ADP and with WorkMarket. I will never not be the founder of WorkMarket, and so I will stay engaged as an advisor to the company because they're such an amazing company, such an amazing group of people that no matter what I do in the future of work, it will always be with them. But my next company is probably not in this space, but we'll see. I'm in the ideation phase right now where I am whiteboarding things. And yes, I put up a whiteboard wall at home and I will think it through.
We've been using Miro for our whiteboard lately. Have you ever tried that? It's a digital whiteboard. It's pretty cool if you're remote.
I'm sure it's cool, but there's something about standing in front of that whiteboard with a marker that it's tactile. I have to have
I hear you. All right. Well, Jeff, I'm going to read your book. It's on my Kindle. Thank you so much for being on the show today. This was awesome. We should do a social distance coffee one of these days in Manhattan.
I would look forward to it. To it. Thank you so much for having me. Super fun.
Thanks for listening in to today's episode. I want to give a big thank you to Jeff for being on the podcast and for enlightening us all on what the future of work will likely hold. I really think he's onto something with a lot of his predictions, and I'm excited to see what happens between AI, bots, remote work, on-demand work, etc. There's a lot of cool stuff coming, and it's anyone's guess as to what will happen. But as a data scientist myself, I love seeing predictions that are actually based on data and trends. So be sure to check out Jeff's book. It's called The End of Jobs, The Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. You can find it at Amazon. We'll leave a link to this in the show notes at getleverage.com/podcast. And if you need help managing your freelancers, you can head to his platform, workmarket.com, to see if it might be a good fit for you. And if you haven't already, be sure to download our free guide to creating a remote communication system with your team. It's a quick 4-step method that you can use to either set up a remote communication system from scratch or improve the system you currently have. If you feel like things are getting lost or getting way too many notifications, or if you don't know where to start with remote work, this is the guide for you. You can find that link at getleverage.com/podcast and click on today's episode to make sure to get that. And as always, we would love for you to leave a rating and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already. It really helps us out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.